I'm Tom from Do-It-Yourself Home Automation, and this is a review of The Victorian Internet, a book by Tom Standage. So this is a really fascinating book. It was actually originally released in 1998, so it's on a little bit on the older side now, but because it is a history book and this is the second edition, I think a lot of what Tom Standage shares in here is pretty timeless. The focus here is really about the history of the telegraph. So that might not be obvious from the title, The Victorian Internet, but it's actually a really detailed, really interesting history of the telegraph. And what Standage does, and the reason why he titles the book that, is relates the modern internet, which was very new when he first wrote the book, to the historical technology of the telegraph, and draws a lot of parallels between the kind of world-changing aspect of information sharing that came with the telegraph, being able to share information immediately, and the world-changing aspects of the internet, which has really only grown since he wrote the book. So again, I think it is really something that's a lot more timeless than you might expect for a book written about the internet in the late 90s. Some of the really interesting points here, I think, he starts with a history of the telegraph, which if you've never heard about it, never heard about that transformation, is really fascinating. Some of the early visual telegraphs, which were literally, a pole with a flag on the top, and were still useful. They were used throughout France and Europe to send military messages, government messages, all the way to the long process of developing the electronic telegraph. A lot of really interesting kind of biographical information about Samuel Morse, who created the telegraph, and Morse code, and sort of the struggles he went through, and even recognizing that he had created something pretty remarkable, and the struggles he went through convincing others that this was important. It's something that I don't think we saw as much with the launch of the internet, but just convincing people that this was something useful. Being able to share information instantaneously over a distance took a long time. Convincing them that it was better than the visual telegraphs that they had developed previously took a long time. So just as a history of science, a history of a technology, I think it's a really fascinating book, extremely well done. A lot of really interesting anecdotes, very specific information about, this history. And I think it's, again, just a fascinating history book, but it also has a lot of relevance for today. So I think a lot of the lessons that Standage explores in here about the history of the telegraph and how that technology came to be, as he draws the parallel, even today, are really relevant for the internet. So things like the difficulty sometimes in convincing people that a new technology is important. For anybody who's an innovator today, I think that's still an ongoing challenge. So it's a great book if you're in that field, if you work in tech, if you just like these really detailed historical narratives based on a lot of great research. Just a really accessible book. So, tech topics can sometimes be dense. This isn't. There's just a lot of intrigue. There's the first online wedding, he calls it, took place over the telegraph. There's a lot of very personal, very human stories in here too. So if you love historical books, nonfiction books, sort of deep dives into historical topics, definitely don't be scared away by the fact that this book is now over 20 years old. I found it felt just as relevant and fresh now as it did back in the 90s when it was written. And I think a lot of the information, again, on the historical aspects of the telegraph are timeless. And surprisingly, a lot of the information about the internet and the implications of this older industry for today's industries are still relevant too. So great gift for somebody who's into nonfiction. And again, if you work in tech or you just have an interest about Victorian time period and technologies, this is a great book. Check out The Victorian Internet by Tom Standage.